people have filtered in. My name's Elmar Seita, and I'm going to talk a bit about surveillance today, and the way that surveillance affects our lives. There are a lot of different kinds of surveillance that we interact with in a modern city. We've been watching people for a very long time, and every time we invent a new form of media or a new technology, we also eventually invent a new kind of surveillance that goes along with that technology. The list you see here of surveillance technologies is almost necessarily incomplete. So, to make this a bit more real, let's take a minute to look at how many ways an average city dweller interacts with surveillance and monitoring systems in a sort of prototypical city. Oops. So, you wake up and you turn on the lights, and a smart electric meter notes the change in power use. While you make your coffee, you check your webmail. Your ISP screens and stores all of the web traffic. You reply to an email, and the intelligence agency stores it and keyword matches the contents. Your mail provider analyzes the information and sells it to an ad company. You turn on your phone, and it registers your location with the E911 database. The phone company also records it. The intelligence agency cross-references the 2 new text messages that come in with the email you just sent. You take a shower, and the gas and water meters note the usage. You get dressed and get on the subway to go to work. Along the way, you appear on cameras run by your landlord, the transit agency, several nearby merchants, the police, and the traffic agency. The time you swipe your card to enter the subway is stored, along with your identity. While you're on the platform, you get a call from your boss. The numbers, time, and duration are logged for billing use and possible law enforcement use. The phone company doesn't capture the voice data, but the company that you work for may capture it on his end, and the microphone attached to the camera that you're standing under might also capture it. The train arrives, and you walk by an air quality monitoring box as you get on. As the train leaves the station, the transit authority tracks the train's movement, and onboard cameras record you. When you walk out, the destination of your journey might be recorded in your Metro card with some systems. The turnstile also increments the number of people leaving the station in this time period. On the way into the office, in addition to passing through the vision of a couple dozen more cameras, you stop to buy a croissant. You pay by credit card, and the transaction is recorded by the merchant, the credit card processor, the credit card company, and the issuing bank. The last 3 of them all run it through fraud detection systems and sell the data to marketers. Your mobile registers your changing location as you walk past a weather station. The radio signal from your phone is evaluated by an RF threat detection system run by the National Security Agency. A cab with its own video system and GPS tracker drives by, and plate and face detection systems recognize the car and the driver separately. It backfires, and its onboard data collection system for its emissions capture a whole bunch of data from that. A nearby gunshot detecting microphone evaluates that noise and throws it out as a false positive. The car itself is also logging engine data and speed data, plus acceleration, which the police and insurance companies can use in the event of an accident. It drives over a temporary traffic load sensor and past a red light camera, and less obviously, past a chemical sniffer looking for explosive residue. You walk into your office through an alarmed door and past a window with a glass break detector, and also past a heat rise and smoke detector. You show up on another camera as you swipe your card to get in, which is logged, as is the time you log into your computer. You load up a web page, and that's checked by a corporate web filter. You've been awake less than 2 hours. Half a dozen government agencies have logged information about you, plus at least 3 times as many private organizations. So, now that we have some idea of the scope of the issue and just how pervasive it is, let's take a step back and look at some of the structural issues around surveillance to better understand its position within this larger socioeconomic frame. One of the distinct complications of looking at surveillance work is the same property of digital information that makes it fundamentally a more useful medium for its intended purpose. It can be really easily retransmitted and aggregated. The physical installation of sensors is obvious and visible, but once those sensors exist, repurposing that data can be done much, much less visibly. For instance, when a municipality decides to install a camera system, They may first present it as a traffic camera, theoretically only in place to watch for accidents and to review traffic levels. However, the police very quickly shift those same traffic cameras over to more general use. This has been true since CCTV was installed anywhere. The very first system in Munich in 1958 was originally a traffic camera system that was used for general police work within a couple of years. The pattern repeats itself for many different technologies. Mobile phone location tracking is a great example here. Originally in the US, the E911 location reporting feature was only designed to let emergency operators know where people were calling from, because this was an increasing problem that they were having. People would call up with cell phones and they wouldn't know where to send the ambulance to. However, police and intelligence agencies rapidly adopted it. Last year, 1 out of the 4 major US carriers reported more than 8 million cell phone location data requests just for GPS data, not for tower-based location data that's much more common, not for 911 calls, not for intelligence agency operations, not for civil lawsuits, just from the police. And that's just one carrier. So the largest forms of secondary use, even larger than that kind of thing, involve sharing and buying and selling data. This is a pretty fundamental feature of modern society. The very concept of a credit rating is based on companies sharing financial information with each other through mediating rating agencies. This happens both for consumers and for large enterprises. The same thing is now happening with other less clear-cut information, like the results of data profiling performed by marketing firms. An amazing amount of information is included in these profiles, down to stuff like mood data reported by voice stress analysis systems that are built into interactive voice response systems. So when you call up some kind of thing and it says, oh, say operator for operator, it tries to figure out what kind of mood you're in, and that affects how your call gets routed. Sometimes if there's a menu system that isn't recognizing you and you just start screaming at it, it'll transfer you to an operator even though it didn't recognize anything. But it also takes a note of who you are once it figures that out and ties it into account data, and a lot of times that stuff sticks around on those records and then gets aggregated. So, and this can include stuff. So, you have a marketing profile that then says, oh, the last time you call, the last 5 times you've called your credit card company, you've been really upset, like much more so than their average users are. In much of the world, these kinds of data clearinghouses are really largely unregulated. Similar things exist within the state. In the past 10 years especially, governments have been building large interagency databases, and they collect all sorts of information, not just about convicted criminals. National intelligence agencies have also been taken to buying the data from civilian clearinghouses. They can't economically collect all that data on their own, but that also means that they can get around the rules on who they can watch and what kinds of data they can collect. But that means that they get data that was never vetted for intelligence use, was never intended for that kind of, for the kinds of roles it gets pushed into, like those voice stress systems. These kinds of data sales, and really the entire secondary use system, are driven by, among a lot of other things, but primarily driven by the expense of gathering this data. Once a city has spent millions and millions of dollars on a CCTV system, there's immense pressure on the city to make the most of that investment. This leads to second uses of that data being set up. These secondary uses may not have much, if any, direct benefit to the general population, but they show that the city is making the most of its investment. A lot of the time these things are done either for internal city political reasons that, oh, it'd be really convenient if we had this, or they're just done to literally, show the voters, oh, well, we spent all this money, but look, it's being used for all of these things. Whether or not anyone actually wants that, it still gets the message through. A similar pressure exists in the commercial world, where companies that have accumulated data for legitimate primary business purposes look for ways to defray the cost of all of that data accumulation. This is one of the big things that happened with credit card companies. That, oh, we have this huge database. Well, how can we make money on that huge database? And then they start selling it. Similar pressures are resulting in a lot of public-private cooperations where you get networks of public and private cameras going together, that kind of thing, or the places where intelligence agencies are buying databases from the marketers. The same pressures that end up that cause this second use end up being behind a lot of the cases where the government uses surveillance abusively. If you have the opportunity to do this sort of thing, if you have the opportunity to abuse a surveillance system, that will happen simply because, oh, it's easy, why not do it? It's really pretty rare that governments of so-called free countries, free nations, specifically go out of their way to build systems to track, for instance, political dissidents. That's really kind of hard to justify if you actually build the system with that in mind. However, it's a regular occurrence that systems that are built for some legal purpose, whether they're wiretap systems with insufficient safeguards, databases that are only intended to track known criminals, etc., are used to track and to monitor and to harass dissidents and both political and even personal enemies. The more global a system's reach, the more damage it can do. The more easily that data can flow around through a system, the harder it is to ensure that there are appropriate controls on all levels. The progress of the technology of surveillance is directly at odds with the prevention of abuse, even assuming that that surveillance is good in the first place. So one of the other issues is the equality of surveillance versus aggregation of data. There's a large class of initiatives that either do invade people's privacy or have the potential to do so that are not based on gathering new data, but just based on making data which already exists more available. Even if it's available in some form, that doesn't mean that it's easy to get at. The argument is that there's no actual change in how much privacy someone has when this happens, but that's pretty obviously false. Privacy isn't an absolute binary function. It's a gradation across types of information, across different amounts of data that are available, and most specifically across ease of access. Changing any of these has an immediate and concrete effect on individual privacy. This alone, assuming that we say that violating someone's privacy is an evil action, that there is a direct social harm there, kind of puts to lie Google's claims to not be evil. I mean, no matter how much good they've done in other cases, they have a very shaky record on personal privacy, and they've done more than any other single corporation to make all kinds of data, regardless of what it's used for, what it is, anything like that, easily available. So when you get things like aggregation and data profiling, stuff gets even more complicated. When companies or agencies make an effort to collect large swaths of information from both public and private sources and create a profile out of it, they get a lot more information out of that after it's been processed than just what they captured. They can do things like say, well, in 95% of the cases where we saw this pattern of purchases, it meant that someone had just lost their job. Now, chances are maybe you are in that 5%, but they can just simply say, well, yeah, this is probably what that means. Small, fairly trace amounts of data can be statistically telling to a really surprising degree. Economies of scale help this process a lot. Both you need the economy of scale to build out the system and get the database that you're doing your analysis from, but also to build a system like that to investigate one person would be really horrendously expensive. There's no way you can justify spending $100 million, even if you're the NSA, to investigate a single person. However, $100 million to investigate 100 million people, okay, sure, why not? This difference in economies of scale is one of the reasons why the future that we all go along with having no privacy is pretty fundamentally unworkable, even assuming there isn't really an intrinsic need for privacy. It doesn't result in the equality that it's being sold as resulting in. Differential resources create a power dynamic in who can know what. If the results of all of those data profiling systems were public, then there might be an argument, but they're not. There's no reason and there's no way to compel some marketing firm to release all of the data profiles that they just spent all of this money on, and unless that information is public, you don't actually have that kind of equality of privacy. Beyond that, organizational privacy and personal privacy are completely different things. You can hurt a corporation monetarily when you leak